Hello, and welcome to eCom Insights, the podcast where we give you data-led tips to optimize your profits online. Hello, and welcome back to eCom Insights with me, Rail.
And me, Matt.
So in this episode, we are joined by one of our newest partners, Taxually. So when one thinks of tax and compliance and VAT and all those sort of things, they're typically quite technical, yet very, very important topics. And I certainly do not pretend to know much about this particular area, particularly with e-commerce. Matt probably knows a bit more than me, but certainly not an expert either. So that's why we've invited Tommy Henbest, Business Development and Partnership Manager at Taxually. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Hi, Raul. Hi, Matt. Thank you very much for having me on this morning. Really looking forward to taking a deeper dive into some, let's try and keep them interesting tax pods, shall we?
Indeed.
So you started your e-commerce journey at Global E-commerce Experts. Obviously, our paths crossed there. Just tell us a bit about your journey there, Tommy, and how that all mapped out for you.
I started, I think, around 4 or 5 years ago now, working at a company called Global E-commerce Experts. I was previously always kind of in sales-based positions before then. And an opportunity came up at a local, 3PL fulfillment center, which I was looking for work at the time. And a good friend of mine, Tom, who I now work with at Taxually, had a slight relationship with them and knew the owners there and said it would be a really good position to go for. So started working there as like a European success manager. So what they did was they offered like a full end-to-end expansion like service, where you get VAT registered, you make sure your products are compliant, do the translations, then you look into like logistics, fulfillment, account management. So really good place to learn about e-commerce, all the kind of turning cogs of the ecosystem. And I was there for 18 months, and then I started managing the partnerships at Global E-commerce Experts as well. So speaking to other businesses within the industry. Matt and I did previously do a podcast as well there. So you might be seeing me twice on the channel now. Great experience. Couldn't really complain about what I was learning there. And then over time I always kind of knew the team at Taxually, and then kind of came together, used to see each other at events and that kind of thing. And then eventually, I think Tom managed to twist my arm enough and turn me over to the dark side, which is the world of tax.
Tax and VAT. So you mentioned that that whole sort of turning cogs of the e-commerce ecosystem. It's vast, isn't it, in the world of digital? What led you to the world of tax and VAT out of all of that?
So it was absolutely 100% right, Matt. There's I'm sure as you guys know, being in the space as well, there's constantly different changes that are being made, whether it's Amazon related, whether it's solely VAT or tax related. So there was always lots to keep up on. The opportunity with tax, I mean, listen, I didn't ever sit there 10 years ago and think, 10 years I want to work in VAT and tax. I'll tell you that. I'm pretty honest about that. But what excited me about VAT and really what excited me was the company Taxually. So the growth that they were seeing in the space, obviously coming into kind of a role where you're working still in partnerships and business development. So I always loved speaking to people about their businesses, how they started, how they got going, etc., what they're doing well, what hasn't worked so well. So I still had that piece of the job as well.
Yeah, I mean, you made a joke there about sort of VAT and tax and what have you, but I mean, it is super important. One thing you don't want to do is annoy our friends at Customs and Excise and get things wrong. So I guess there's some common misconceptions. If you're selling on Shopify or any DTC site, like you said, and I'm selling through Amazon, for example, what are the differences between VAT and tax? And should I assume that Amazon's just dealing with all the VAT, or is it something I should be looking at closely? Or lead us through it, just so anyone that's going along the journey doesn't get caught out with a nasty letter.
Absolutely, Matt. You're 100% right. You need to make sure, just because you're set up for one way in Amazon, and then you look to launch potentially like a D2C channel in Europe, etc., you need to make sure you're doing your due diligence before you launch and working out that you're set up from the right tax perspective. Otherwise, you could start selling in a region for 3 to 6 months. you found out you're non-compliant from a tax perspective, and you can be deregistered, you can have big fines, etc. So one of the first things is always do your research, always speak to an expert on that level. When it comes to like selling on different channels, it's all, depends on how the goods are being fulfilled, where the goods are going to, etc. So as an example, with Amazon, if you're an FBA seller, wherever your goods are positioned within the FBA, you would need to be locally VAT registered within that region. So that's pretty straightforward. If you're pan-EU, there's X amount of countries in Europe. If you're in the UK, the Netherlands and Sweden are now launching now, I believe, as well. So you just need to make sure you're locally VAT registered from that perspective, wherever the goods are stored from an FBA. When it comes to potentially your own channel, like Shopify or a WooCommerce store or anything like that, what you would need to do is you would need to be locally VAT registered wherever your goods are held. And then depending where the movement of your goods is going, you may need additional like VAT registrations, VAT numbers to assist with your selling. So as an example, if you're a UK seller who wants to ship goods into the EU, it's recommended to use something called IOSS, which allows your goods to be imported into Europe, and then you have one filing rather than have to file in every individual region. Or as an example, if you're positioning your goods in the EU, lots of people we see these days are storing their goods in places like the Netherlands, Germany. In that instance, you might need to be OSS registered, which gives you access to the rest of the free market in the EU and not be liable for individual VAT filings. So yeah, there is certain things that you need to make sure you're set up on from that perspective before you launch.
So a question from me, which is how much, if anything, does Amazon help you with this process or any of those sort of platforms? Or is it just sort of you're better off seeking independent advice for most people?
Amazon will assist you with all of this kind of VAT piece. So they have a program called Amazon VAT Services, which we're one of the agencies who assist with partnering and servicing that kind of section. So that is a very basic service. You're still dealing with Seller Central from any communication level. You can only track Amazon sales. The pricing structure and the fees is based kind of pulling your fees out of Amazon. If you're selling outside of Amazon or you're looking at other regions, it's not really recommended to utilize Amazon VAT services. Or even if you're unsure about your VAT and it's something you would have a few questions around, it's very hard to deal with Seller Central and communicate and have a point of contact as Amazon, as I'm sure everyone who's listening knows, and you both know from being in the industry. So yeah, there are other obviously tax providers and services in the space, as well as ourselves, who can deal with you on kind of like a more to one-to-one level. So you can have like an account manager, you'd have a customer care rep. Built into our dashboard is a monitored chat box 24/7, where so if you ever have any immediate questions or need assistance, you can get that extra level of care and nurturing, which when it comes to VAT and when there's technical questions around, and as you say, your maybe uncertainties around filings or declarations, you'd rather be sure than to be guessing, etc. So in that instance, it's often worth, utilizing an agent, someone who's after you from a VAT and a tax perspective.
We'll no doubt get onto the B word shortly, but I am conscious that we do, we're mainly, this podcast is currently mainly focused on the UK and EU, but obviously a lot of our listeners and clients are based in the US. And I guess there's sort of similarities of, in the States, you have different sort of tax, VAT or sales tax rates, don't you, in different states? And I guess if you're looking over in the EU as a United States of Europe, has something similar. But what's the sort of, how can we help some of our friends across the pond if they're coming into the EU, just go into it eyes wide open and not get caught up on any of the sort of tax hurdles and issues, or, be useful just to compare and contrast, because I guess there's similarities, but not all is the same. Yeah.
It's a great point you make there, Matt. And obviously from a US perspective, yes, often you would need state sales tax registrations, which can be very quick and easy to do so. I'd say the main consideration when you're launching into Europe is to look at like your kind of forecast when you want to launch, and look at like kind of deadlines. Because in the EU at the moment, for businesses based in the EU or based outside of the EU, there are some very specific regions that are taking quite a long time to register for VAT.
Like Spain, I think that's one I've had issues with recently.
Spain, you have to do certain things like get your documents apostilled, so you have to send them off to a physical tax office and sign them yourself. So that can be obviously a more complicated like service and could take longer than you would expect. But there's regions like Germany and UK where it can take 2, 3, 4 months to register for VAT. And obviously, yeah, it's being wary that you need to have VAT numbers and registrations in individual regions rather than just, oh, can I not just get one EU number? But that doesn't mean the opportunity is not there. I think if you're an established US seller, the best next place you can go is the EU. I think if you look to the whole of the EU market from an Amazon perspective and you're fully optimized in all of it, you'd be at around 80 to 90% of your US Amazon sales. Obviously, we know US is a kind of gigantic monster in the e-commerce game. But yeah, if you're fully optimized in Europe, you could be looking to do around 80 to 90%. Obviously, that's just a standard figure. Some products would do better, some products would do worse. But timeframes is the main thing. People, when launching in Europe, would automatically look, okay, I need to now process a shipment. My shipment's going to take me a month or 3 weeks to get there. And it's sometimes you just be like, hold on. We need to make sure you're set up from a VAT perspective. Is your product compliant to sell? These are the kind of questions that you need to be asking before you think about launching into the US. So you can map out, okay, my UK looks like it's going to be ready for Q4. Let's start looking at our shipments in October, November. Let's hold off on that for the meantime. Have we done our translations? Those are the kind of things you need to be asking yourself before you launch in Europe. And always speak to an expert, as you say. All of like companies like ourselves and yourselves as well, Optimize On, will always speak to you and consult you before kind of going through any technical issues. So this is what you need to do. These are the timeframes. These are the processes. And then the business can make the decision from themselves, whether they think it's the right time, whether they want to wait, etc. So
again, just keeping it very simplistic because I'm pretty much a newbie to this area.
Every day's a learning day.
Are the rates different across, like within the EU, across different countries? Are the thresholds different? Like, I mean, how much? Like, if I'm thinking about, if I'm thinking about sort of selling in the EU, am I modeling out all these different rates and thresholds and everything else as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there are different VAT rates across Europe. Potentially not as sometimes complicated as the US, because US will have different state sales tax per region. They'll have corporation taxes in certain regions, which are always fluctuating. So Europe has they have like a set VAT rate per country. These kind of may change every couple of years, but generally they stay around the same mark. And kind of, I'd say average speaking, they range between around 19 to 23%. Something that I always kind of, when speaking with businesses and brands, is always kind of letting them know that obviously when launching in Europe, these are the kind of VAT rates. Just make sure in your final sale price that you're accumulating for at the end of the quarter, you're going to be expecting to pay around the 22% mark in VAT to the local tax office. So yeah, that's something we're accumulating for. Obviously, you can look at individual regions. You can set up your pricing from your Shopify store or your Amazon store to be exactly at 19% over, 23% over, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, I always say around the 22% mark, you should account for that you'll be paying to the tax office at the end of the quarter or at the end of the month.
So what do you reckon, guys? Are we going to go there and mention the B word and Brexit and how this has made things so much easier for us across Europe? And I guess I jest, and let's just take the politics to one side. But it is important in this context of this discussion. You know, what's changed and what do we need to be aware of in respect to Brexit?
Absolutely, it's something that I think nobody likes to talk about today, Matt. And also at the same time, I think when people talk about Brexit, half the people, and myself being one of them, nobody even really truly understands what it still means. But from a VAT and a tax perspective, it definitely did make some changes in between the trade and the movement of goods between the EU and the UK. So as an example, you used to be able to have free movement of goods between the UK and the EU. I believe the UK used to be on the Pan-EU program, etc. So now there's a few different things that you would need to set up before you're looking to launch in the UK and the EU. So one of the main things is you need to now separately have a different EORI number. So an economic operation registration identification number.
Wow, nicely done.
Bit of a mouthful there. But that basically what that number is, it's a number that accompanies your goods when they're clearing through customs to show that you're a registered economic operator within that region. So previously you used to have an EU EORI number where at any point, if you wanted to ship your goods into an EU country, you would need to have a VAT registration and you'd have an EU EORI number and your goods would get cleared through customs. Now you need to have a separate, so you need to have a UK EORI number and you would need to have an EU EORI number. EU still obviously is active for the whole of the EU market, but we need our separate one now. And then, yeah, it's other services like the one I mentioned earlier. So IOSS, previously you'd just be able to send goods freely between obviously UK and the EU with ease of movement of goods through shipments. Now, probably you'd say they're a bit more rigorous with their checks with goods crossing between the channel. IOSS and other services can help with this. And yeah, just making sure that if you're selling from the EU into the UK, there's now, you can sell goods direct to consumer, but there's, I believe it's about 75k as a distance selling threshold. So after you breach that kind of threshold, you would then need to get locally VAT registered in the UK, even if you're not storing goods there. Whereas before you could utilize like OSS or something like that. So these, yeah, just a few things. Obviously, the opportunity is still there. The Germany and UK are seen as the biggest European markets when it comes to Amazon and e-commerce as an industry. So if you're looking to establish yourself in Europe, it is worth doing. The cost of whether it's registering for VAT or a few extra shipments isn't huge compared to like the opportunity that you could potentially be missing out on. So yeah, I'd still say that the opportunity in the markets are massive, like from an e-commerce perspective. Just a few extra levels of red tape administration that you would need to go through before you're kind of selling in them regions.
Yeah, Germany's larger than the UK, isn't it? From an e-commerce perspective, for our friends across the pond, and obviously the economic powerhouse of the EU, the very high net worth, a lot of high net worth individuals, good quality products sell well there. So I mean, don't lose sight of that, I guess, is one to watch out. I mean, I guess I'm just I'm sitting somewhere in California in my head as an Amazon seller, listening to us going, oh my God, this sounds really complicated in the EU with all the tax pieces. Should I be doing it? And I would say just call out, there's a few things to bear in mind from a strategic point of view. One, these barriers of entry mean that potentially there's markets in the EU that are less competitive than the States, for example. And if you can go through all these loopholes, as it were, and get all set up and fully optimized, it's a lot harder to knock you off the top purchase, sort of like the largest seller in the EU, than it is in the US, because potentially one market, it's super competitive over the States. You could be well established now, but competitors can come in and challenge that a lot quicker in the States, in my experience. So, if there's a barrier to entry, there's an opportunity. I guess I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, it's a lot more saturated, the US. There's a lot more, as you say, price cutters than people coming in that are kind of trying to local you, etc. And in Europe, you still get the ease of movement of goods. The Amazon FBA PAN-EU program is fully working. It's very easy to use. Once you're set up from a VAT and a tax perspective, you're sending goods to one location, and then you're getting access to 6 markets, which, as you say, Matt, if you look at your Italys, your Frances, your Spains, how many people do you think are selling in there? Everyone's got reasonable buying trends, etc. So yeah, the opportunity is massive in Europe.
Going back to the Brexit one, just do you have any numbers around increased cost of compliance? I mean, like it's, you're outlining the process here, but is it, sounds worse than it is in terms of like actual, money spent or time spent and things like that?
In terms of money spent per year, for you to be, obviously logistics is something which you would be processing from a company anyway, but from a VAT and tax perspective, it will cost you less than €1,000 a year.
Yeah.
To be in that region.
So it's pretty much a rounding error for most sellers,
exactly.
Considering it.
And as you say, for the size of the market that you have access to, and the other pieces that like Matt just mentioned, kind of the competitiveness of the space, the price points,
Yeah.
€1,000 isn't a huge amount of money. And yeah, that's includes setup and upkeep and everything like that. You'd probably be looking at more like the 800, €700 a year mark for just on a year by year basis to be set up in the UK. So not a huge cost in the perspective of things.
And do you need to be when you register for VAT in each one of these individual countries, do you need to also register like a local entity, like a registered company? Or is it like, just walk me through that if you don't mind.
Yeah, so that's a question that I get asked a lot from especially US businesses or businesses based outside of Europe who are looking to launch in this space. Everyone thinks that you would need to set up a limited company or a GmbH or a BV company to be able to sell within the region. And in all honesty, there is no benefit of doing so as long as if you're an online seller, so you're looking to sell e-commerce stores, Shopify, Amazon, you want to trade potentially B2B as well out of a 3PL or anything like that, you really have no benefit of setting up a limited business because you'll then become liable for things like corporation taxes, pensions, and just more liabilities as a business anyway. As the only time that I'd say it's worth looking at opening up an entity in Europe is if you're looking to potentially open like a brick and mortar store or something like that. You can manage B2B relationships, you can manage direct to consumer, you can operate in places like Amazon and FBA just by getting VAT registered. It's a lot cheaper to do so rather than managing the upkeep, hiring an accountant to run your LTD, etc. And you get all the access to the markets from being VAT registered. It almost just acts as like a plug-in or an add-on to where your business or your entity is based, whether it's an LLC, an Australian business, etc. So
that's a good answer.
And I guess it's like, any sort of current regulations and updates that we should be aware of at the moment, just within the sort of tax space. Obviously, you mentioned the EU. That's a big old area with lots of different countries and moving parts and legislation. Is there anything that you can see catching out sellers at the moment or brands on e-commerce?
There have been a few services which, like Amazon has introduced. They offered something called like call off stock, which didn't turn out to work very well. There's obviously eco tax, which is just kind of in the last couple of years come into the European space. So eco tax is a service. So EPR is what it's called, which stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. What that basically is, it's launched in 3/4 countries at the moment. So it's launched in Germany, France, and Spain. Some of you Amazon sellers who are based in Europe may have been given notifications from Amazon in reference to this. And basically what the EPR, the Extended Producer Responsibility, like kind of legislation means is that if you're selling goods in Europe and your goods are packaging based, or they've got batteries, or they're rubber, or they're electronical goods, you as a seller have to take a certain level of responsibility of what happens to that product after it's either been discarded, broken, or thrown away. So you have to register for, in Germany, it's called like a lucid number. There's certain like names across like Spain, Germany, France. You have to register for an EPR. So similar to VAT, get an EPR certificate. And then what you would have to do is make a contribution per year based on the level of waste that you are producing. So as an example, if you have one packaging and it's one piece of plastic packaging and it's got 2 batteries in it, you would look, how much does that weigh? How much packaging is there? How many units have I sold across the year? And then you would have to make a contribution to the local recycling office to say, here you go, here's €500. I've sold X amount of batteries and plastic in your region, and then go from there. And yeah, you need to make sure as a seller that you're set up from that perspective. That is, live in Germany, France, and Spain. And I also believe it's just coming into play in the UK as well. So normally Amazon is quite good. It will notify you on that front if you do have a product which falls into a specific category. France is a lot more in depth. So they've got loads of like different types of categories. Germany and Spain are a little bit more basic. But yeah, just something to keep an eye on. It is service that Taxually offer. We'll go into more detail around pieces like that in the white paper that we'll produce after this, into the VAT, sales tax, all of that kind of thing. something to keep an eye on as well is eco tax. Yeah, and to be honest, it's good for the environment. So
it's sort of a good thing. I mean, if you look at like the climate pledge friendly program that Amazon have about reducing the amount of air and packaging and just generally doing the right thing for environment, that's a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing. Consumers are searching out for products that are, least amount of plastic usage, all those sort of good things. There's nothing more that drives us nuts as consumers is when you have this huge, enormous package and then this tiny little pack of batteries in. So I think it's just a good thing just to avoid that tax. But equally, guys, as FBA fees are going up, anything you can do to reduce packaging is going to potentially reduce your FBA costs as well. So I think it's all good.
Yeah, I think the manufacturers and the businesses who are selling these plastic heavy products is probably at the drawing board at the moment, trying to work out how they can cut new corners on that front. So
yeah. Do the right thing rather than trying to avoid the tax, I guess, is the message there.
Exactly. Yeah. It's there for a reason.
Yep.
Shifting the focus a bit to back to VAT, but on the refund side in Europe here. So, can you maybe walk me through the process? Is this something that brands ignore or not ignore, but I guess don't take full advantage of? What are the pitfalls there?
Yeah, you'd be surprised sometimes, Rael. I'll speak to a business or a brand and they'll talk about how they've been importing goods for a certain period of time into Europe and they don't realize about like the refund, like reclaiming or refunding any VAT. So basically, in Europe, you have a local VAT rate. And on some services, you'll be expecting to pay VAT on. So as an example, like there's some Amazon service fees which have VAT on them, which are reclaimable. Or really one of the main points in terms of Europe is importing your goods, which US, it works a little bit different when importing your goods. So say as an example, you're looking to send your goods into Germany, VAT rate 19% in Germany, I'm pretty sure. And say example, you're looking to import 10,000 euros worth of goods into that region. Germany will expect you to pay 1,900 euros as an importation VAT charge to clear them goods through customs. That's of the cost value of the stock. And then once your goods are imported, so you've cleared them, they're in Amazon, say you've sold that 10,000 euros worth of stock, you, at your next filing, are able to reclaim that back. So from Cashflow, it's a great kind of service. I believe they don't offer, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't believe they offer a service like this in the US where you can reclaim VAT. Obviously, you have customs and duties, but you can't reclaim them back. Obviously, in Europe, 20% is quite a high kind of percentage paying. But just be wary from a cash flow perspective, that is something you can reclaim back. There are also other regions within Europe. So UK has a thing called PVA, post-VAT accounting, where so you almost defer the VAT, the import VAT upon entry.
I was going to say, that's the one I've heard of, yeah.
Netherlands has Article 23, where you can offer a similar, deferment of the VAT upon entry. So for potentially your bigger brands and cash flow, etc., if you're importing 100,000 euros worth of stock, who wants to be paying 20 grand in terms of just as a clearance fee? So there are methods and ways for European sellers to defer that and make sure their cash flow is still running well.
I know. I would say just on the VAT side of things, I think there was a while ago something like carousel fraud or whatever. Is it people that were shipping mobile phones in and out of Europe and trying to fiddle the books? My point is that I'm not saying anyone listening to this podcast is going to be doing that sort of thing, but the tax authorities do really look at your paperwork, and if something's out of order, you could they can come down very hard on you. So make sure you've got your paperwork all in order if you're going to be doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. People may be able to clear goods for a certain way in customs, one way, etc. But it's the same with not being VAT registered or not making sure your product's compliant. If you keep doing it over time, you will get found out eventually. And when you do get found out, your problems are going to be a lot worse than if you were just to set up in the right way. You'll get blacklisted from a region. You'll get huge fines. It'll create you a lot of headaches. So always make sure you're set up in the right perspective before you launch. Don't try and, like, as you say, don't
try and hack it or scrimp on the paperwork.
You'll always get found out. So
good advice. So Tommy, let's take this beyond the EU and do a bit of a whistle-stop tour around the world here. So I guess pick a few countries where you're seeing quite a lot of traction, quite a lot of interest. I think Australia comes to mind, at least from an Optimizer point of view. We're seeing quite a lot of uptick there. But just pick a few and go over what things to consider and how the regimes work there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another piece when obviously trading internationally. You want to be making sure you're doing your due diligence, and everywhere is set up differently. So, as an example, from Australia, everywhere basically has a local tax law, but it just goes under a different name. So in Australia, it's called GST, which is Goods and Sales Tax. So as mentioned earlier, to sell in Australia, I believe you have a threshold of around, I think it's between the $80,000 to $90,000 mark, which you can store and sell goods in that region before being registered for GST. Once you have exceeded that threshold, you would then need to register for that local tax registration. So that's whether you're in an Amazon FBA or whether you're shipping from a Shopify site, etc., and storing and facilitating your goods from that region. So yeah, keep an idea of the sales, keep tracking how much you're selling and when you're selling it, etc., because once these thresholds are exceeded, it is your responsibility to register and start filing from a VAT and a tax perspective on that front. Another big one, which I'm sure we'll have some listeners from, is USA. So USA is slightly different. It's done on a state-by-state basis when it comes to state sales tax, and they'll have something called a nexus threshold. So when it comes to Amazon or Walmart, which obviously the two biggest kind of marketplaces in the US, Amazon and Walmart actually act as what's called like a marketplace facilitator for tax. So previously, there are lots of businesses and brands who are selling in the US specifically through Amazon, and they were registered in multiple regions when potentially actually they didn't need to, because, as you said, Amazon is acting as that marketplace facilitator for tax, or Walmart are as well. So there's still worth doing your checks, etc., when selling on Amazon, because you can breach for certain thresholds, or you can trigger some of the nexuses when selling in their regions. And basically what a nexus threshold is, it's a value of goods or a number of transactions that you can sell into a certain state before you become tax liable. So it might be $150,000 across the year that you could sell into that state before you're tax liable, or it's a number of transactions. So you can make 200 transactions, so 200 separate sales into a state before you become state sales tax liable within that region. And if you're a Shopify seller, you need to certainly be registered wherever your goods are stored. So say you've got a Texas warehouse, you need to have state sales tax in Texas. And then what you need to be doing is just keeping an eye on all your individual figures and all your filings to make sure that, okay, I'm started to sell about $150,000 into California this year. Yeah. Do I need to register? Taxually actually offers something called Nexus Analysis, where so we can take a deep dive into your figures and your sales, and then we can actually check where maybe, and we basically monitor it on a traffic light system. So green means you're okay, you're fully compliant in that state. Orange would mean that, okay, you're starting to approach the threshold. This could be a good time to look into state sales tax registration. And then if you're red, it's not good. You need to register as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Someone from America.
Someone knocking on your door.
Exactly.
The IRS. Oh, yeah.
I mean, Tommy, this sounds like quite a big burden, right? Like, I mean, am I meant to be like Amazon doesn't easily, let's say, give you a geographic breakdown of like, you have no control of where people are buying from within the US. So, I mean, am I logging in every week to see and trying to get a breakdown of a state's breakdown to see what's going where and what the thresholds are? I mean, that sounds like a pretty massive burden.
If it's solely Amazon, majority of the time you will be okay, because as I said, Amazon is acting as that marketplace facilitator for sales tax.
Okay.
You have more risk as a company if you're opening up your own D2C channels.
Yeah.
So a Shopify store, a WooCommerce store, a Wix store, something like that. That's where we see sellers are having more issues, or going have to backdate or retroactively file. Wow. Or potentially are receiving fines, etc., which obviously, as we've said throughout this kind of program, that nobody wants to deal with tax, especially in kind of the past. Nobody likes dealing with the present, nobody likes thinking about in the future, but the worst thing you want to do is have to go back and sort out loads of VAT and filings and pay tax offices and pay fines, etc.
Yeah.
So Amazon, there is a smaller amount of risk, but there is still a risk there. So it's something you should still keep an eye on and kind of utilize an expert when it comes to your sales and your filings in Amazon. But the real risk, and where we see people kind of pick up, etc., is on the D2C side. So your Shopify sellers, your WooCommerce sellers, etc. They're the people that really should be keeping a better eye on their stores, on their sales, where their sales are going, over what period of time, etc. And yeah, we offer that. As I said, that's a free service, a Nexus analysis. So
nice.
And that will give you complete clarity and confidence on where you're at, what you need to do, and how you should operate moving forward.
But your system, I mean, all that complexity that Rial alluded to, your system will help automate that and just give, the seller, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
This is what you're liable. Here's the bill to pay, sort of thing, and then you're all clear.
For yourself, and as I said, try to make it as clear as possible. Traffic light system, so you know exactly what you need, when you need it, and how you need it. Canada works the same. Canada, if you're storing goods in Canada, you would need to have either GST or HST, sales tax, or tax registration within that region to operate in Canada. Obviously, yeah, that's a massive market as well. And if you're a US seller looking to launch into a new region, it's kind of the natural progression is to go to Canada because you don't have to cross the Pacific or Atlantic. So
Amazon also operates in Brazil, in South America. Any comments on Brazil?
Or Mexico. There's Mexico.
And Mexico as well,
course.
absolutely, yeah.
Mexico is definitely a growing market. We don't currently service Brazil or Mexico, so my knowledge on their regions isn't huge, but I believe you would need a Mexican VAT or Mexican tax number to be storing and selling goods within that region. Definitely a region to look and consider at though, because we've seen a huge amount of growth in Amazon in Mexico, whether it's 3PLs popping up, agencies who are assisting with the kind of optimization of the stores, etc. So it's definitely a region worth considering. But from my knowledge, which is limited on that region, I believe you would need a Mexican tax registration to start storing and facilitating your goods within that region.
So I get, as a summary here, I mean, in your experience, what are some of the main things where people have tripped up on with this VAT and registration, and as well as some of the best practices? Maybe they're related, those things.
Yeah, best practices is, I'd always say, when it comes to VAT, we see people trip up by, and it's, some people are successful, is trying to kind of handle it themselves. Like if someone says, oh, I'm going to do the UK application themselves, the UK application process is very tenuous, very kind of in-depth around specific documents they want. So sometimes I will speak to people and they say, oh, I'm going to do it myself. And then 2 months later, they're kind of still at square one. So I always say, even if you are looking to do it yourself, always speak to someone before you do so. Time frame, as I mentioned earlier, when launching into a new region, everywhere is different, and that's globally. Always make sure you know about the local, the sales tax laws, etc., or the state sales tax laws. So everywhere works different. Australia, you can store goods in there for a while, and then you would have to register. US, if you store goods within a specific region from a D2C basis, you would need to have state sales tax registration within that region. And then you could reach things called nexuses, which basically mean that you would need to gain registrations in other states. It all depends really where you're looking to launch and how you're looking to do so. So I'd say timeframes is one of the main things that we see, that people will speak to a 3PL, they'll speak to a brand like yourself, you'll have a really good conversation and say, they're ready to go in a month, they want to start sending products. And then you'll just be like, well, it's not feasible, guys. We physically cannot push a registration through within that time. And always making sure that you've kind of got the right technology and the kind of backing behind yourself when it comes to VAT and tax, like filing reports, etc. So often businesses will be putting sales data, sending it to someone, and then crunching data, etc. If you're utilizing a platform which is integrated with softwares, etc., it can save you time on your filings and reduce error when it comes to filings, as well as it's pulling hard sales data from your marketplace. So just making sure, I'd say the main consideration when launching into a new region is definitely research. So even looking at yourself, doing marketplace opportunity reports, checking if you can sell there and if it's feasible and the timeframes to do so.
And I think just one final piece, really, from my point of view, is, as you can imagine, as operators, as an agency, we get asked frequently about tax, and what do I need to consider about if I'm setting up in Germany, for example? Yes, top line we can steer people, but tax is a specialism. We've mentioned if you get it wrong, it can be very expensive, potentially end up in prison in some cases. So let's make sure that, if you need an expert, speak to someone like Taxually. Make sure you've got your up-to-date advice, and because it is complex by its nature. So, I think, it's just don't try and wing it, really, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Not wing it. And as I said, like anyone from a VAT or tax or a reputable business will have a conversation with you. They'll tell you kind of what you would need to do. As I said, it's not going to be easy to often do it yourself, but if a business and brands wants to go do it themselves, as long as they got the information and they've been given the right advice, what really more can you do?
Yeah, and as sellers, we're not tax experts, are we? So, we want to be able to find a quick solution that just deals with a lot of the number crunching, so we can focus on dealing with the consumer and selling.
You'd be surprised how long people would spend and time and doing something themselves, especially from a VAT and tax perspective, going around in circles, trying to communicate with HMRC or tax offices, which
is a joy, isn't it? You must get a buzz about that.
Yeah. If you've got someone who's got a relationship there, they're tax experts, time and the money that you'd spend with them, that time and money is probably worth more to your business in places that you're already coherent in, whether it's marketing, sales, logistics, manufacturing, all of them kind of pieces, which you probably have more experience in rather than, VAT or tax. So
pick your battles.
Pick your battles.
Exactly that route. Yeah.
That's all good advice.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining, Tommy. I think, one of the things Matt and I always talk about how we want to measure this podcast is, like insights per minute kind of thing to provide value to all the listeners. And I think you're rating very, very high over there. So I think it's been, as someone who's pretty much new to the subject, just soaking up loads of things there. So really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a pleasure to speak to you both today. Taxually will be offering anyone who kind of listens and follows up from this podcast, we'll offer actually a free VAT registration if they're looking to launch in Europe. So I'm sure we'll get some diary links distributed after this. My email will be there as well. So if anyone wants to have a conversation, I'll just talk about VAT. We've got some nice offers at the moment. Also, as we mentioned earlier, the white paper is going to be coming out after this, so taking probably a deeper dive into all things VAT, tax, expansion and launching. And then, any European customers as well, Optimize On and Taxually will be working together and collaborating at the PATS event, the PATS event coming up in September. So really looking to going up there, working, collaborating on that one together and hopefully meeting lots of sellers and trying not to bore them to death talking about tax.
It's great, but if you're in the world of pet and pet supplies, then do come along and meet us in person. I think if the white paper that you mentioned, just as a call out for our listeners, go to ecominsights.co.uk/blog. You'll be able to download the exclusive report that Taxually put together and cover a lot of the points we've already spoke about. And do share your thoughts on social with the hashtag eComInsights and drop us an email on ecom.insights@optimizon.co.uk. Otherwise, come and find us on LinkedIn and, just have a chat and let's carry on talking about tax.
Let's do it. Yeah, thank you very much for both having me on today. It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tommy. Cheers.
Excellent. Well, just to remember to subscribe and leave a review. Any ratings, ring that bell if you're on YouTube as well. And keep curious and thriving in the world of e-commerce. Every day's a learning day. So thanks a lot, listeners.